Hello.
Our story begins on Polis Masa. Padme had survived her pregnancy and gave birth to twins. She was saved by her own will to return. Obi-Wan and Yoda were in a room away from her, where they were discussing their own respective victories. Sidious was killed when a pod crashed down on top of him, and Yoda had to ensure his death was certain. After that, Yoda had to flee from the Coruscant guardsmen. Kenobi, on the other hand, cut Anakin out of the sky, and instead of just burning, he slipped into the lava river, being completely consumed by hot liquid magma. The two Jedi knew that they had a lot of work ahead of them. The Sith may have been gone, but their order was in shambles, and on top of that, the Republic was a mess, well now an empire. What made matters worse is what Alderaan informed the two Jedi of when he returned to their room. He was listening to a live broadcast from Coruscant. Masa found the wreckage of the Senate chambers and sealed off the area so that no one could have access to it. He then reported from the Emperor's office that Palpatine had been assassinated by the Jedi. He expressed he'd be taking complete control over the Empire effective immediately. To ensure the survival of their empire and the strength of its future, he'd be taking complete control over the Senate as well. This wasn't him disbanding the Senate itself, but more so nullifying any power it had. He used the death of Palpatine as a state of emergency, and he used the state of emergency the same way Sidious had during the Clone Wars, to prop himself up for more political control over the galaxy. The two Jedi realized that while their victory over the Sith was one that should be rejoiced, their fight against evil had just only begun. When Padme returned to her full health, the two senators, twins, and two Jedi would leave the planet and make their way for Alderaan. Padme was still a little rough. The pregnancy took a lot out of her, but thanks to her friends being present, she was able to be prepared for what would come next. She had strong alliances within the Senate and believed that she could use those to make a political move against Masa. What she didn't know, and what no one else knew, is that he had full control over the entire empire, including the clones. If Mas needed, he could use one of the many contingency orders to turn the clones against the Senate. He had that in his back pocket. After all, the people chose Palpatine to lead them out of the post-war era. They wouldn't want someone like Mas to soak up in Palpatine's glory now, would they? However, that seemed inevitable. Masa was a career politician. He spent the longer part of the last 13 years watching every move Palpatine made. He knew exactly how to play this game, and he would make it work for him. What went well for Mas was the fact that he had such a demanding presence. No one would dare challenge him because he, like Palpatine, demanded respect simply through existing. Other senators would have no issue supporting him because he was a political powerhouse. His support would garner re-election, and for most of these senators, that meant power and more credits. The sacrifice of the Republic was more than enough to make a couple bucks for them. Padme and Bail gathered up on Alderaan with a number of their allies. Padme was struggling with this a lot. She didn't have a ton of energy, and she wasn't just feeling postpartum depression, but agony from the loss of her husband. Every time they had their struggles, they came back. He went too far this time and suffered the consequences. She didn't want to accept that Anakin was gone, but what could she do? She couldn't bring him back from the dead, and she couldn't tell their children what he had become. Maybe the last few hours of his life could have been forgotten, but it's not like she forgot what he did to her on Mustafar's landing platforms. During her sessions with her political allies, she'd have to take some breaks and breathers. Sometimes she'd need to lay down. It was hard for her friends to see too, but they knew that the most they could do is continue to support her through this arduous process. She appreciated the support, and it did genuinely help her with recovery. Due to the Sith being gone, Luke and Leia were able to be kept with the Organas. Padme didn't want to go back to Naboo, because it was too far away from the core, and she didn't have to worry about the Sith coming for her children as it was. No need to worry. This also meant that for Obi-Wan and Yoda, they would continue their own mission. With the numerous senators and friends of Padme consistently around her and the children, Obi-Wan and Yoda were able to collect themselves up and go out into the galaxy. Kenobi was sent to the temple on Edith on Devron. The whole point of him coming to this location is so that he could purify it. During the war, Savage Obrez killed a collection of clones and a Jedi Master and Apprentice on the steps of the temple. Delta Squad brought back the dead bodies to Coruscant, and the Jedi mostly left the temple as it was. They didn't have time to return to it. All the bodies at the site were buried, and the dead droids were scrapped, but Obi-Wan was here to essentially bless the temple and allow it to become a beacon of light in this new era. Aside from the fact that there were Republic troopers once stationed here, they believed the Empire wouldn't ever return. This assumption was made purely by the fact that the Jedi had reported the location to be ruined and destroyed as an outpost that once belonged to the Jedi. They did this for two reasons during the war. The Jedi didn't want anyone going to the outpost, and they also wanted to make sure that once the war was over, they could ceremonially cleanse the Force around it. Because the war never ended before Order 66, they never got the chance to. Palpatine kept a record of it, but that was in his personal journal, just more Jedi locations that he wanted to do away with once they were stripped from their resources. Mas also had no interest in the Jedi beyond them being a threat to his power because he wasn't a Sith, so another reason for the Temple of Edict to be a safe haven for the Jedi. While Obi-Wan was doing this, Yoda went out to the galaxy to find and save lost Jedi amongst the stars. He would then send them to Devron to meet up with Master Kenobi. Because of how quickly the two Jedi Masters acted, they were able to get Jocasta Nu, Terra Sanube, and Coleman Kaj to the Jedi Temple. Once they were there, Obi-Wan spread out with Coleman Kaj, like Yoda, to find other Jedi. It was a difficult experience. Some of them were just frightened and wanted their masters or their friends back. These came in the form of Caleb Dume, Gungi, and Cal Kestis. On the other side of this, there were those within the ranks of the Jedi that were either angry or saw the failure of the Jedi as necessary. This came in the form of Reva or Baylan Skoll. Because it was either Obi-Wan or Yoda finding these lost Jedi, they'd be willing to follow the Jedi back to Deveron. This would continue for months, but as soon as Masa began finding trouble within the walls of the Senate, he began doing erratic things himself. He knew the Jedi were an issue. Ever since Order 66, there had been reportedly less than 100 survivors, which was accurate. But out of those 100 survivors or so, only one had been accounted for, and he was killed. Ironically, the one that was killed was a Paul Temple guard that was destined to become the Grand Inquisitor. Mas turned on him after trying to use him to weed out other Jedi. Grand Inquisitor had as little successes as the clones did. This put Mas on edge, but it didn't compare to his issue with Amidala or her allies. Their movements in the Senate called for an end to martial law in separatist worlds. It called for an end to the militarization of the Empire, and it also called for a stop to the increase of the Imperial military-industrial complex. But things didn't get any easier for her. Once Mas felt that there was blood in the water for his side, and he realized that he was politically weaker than Palpatine, he made a move. As a result, he needed to find a method to ensure he stayed in power. Naturally, Mas would turn to executions and assassinations. He didn't do it, but there were bounty hunters willing to do it, and he had a large enough of a bank account to afford it, not to mention the clone assassin program that was being installed weeks before the end of the Clone Wars. Palpatine knew there would be clones that rebelled, and what a better way to deal with them than clones with enhanced inhibitor chips. Due to the rise of threats in the core on senators that stood against Masa, Obi-Wan removed himself from Deveron and shaved his beard to hide within Padme's circle. He wore Naboo robes and displayed himself as a political advisor, calling himself Ben Nabiri, older brother of Padme Amidala. This worked perfectly and no one turned an eye to it. He was hard to recognize, especially without the beard, and considering it had been more than 10 years since anyone saw him without one, no one thought twice about it. He stuck with Padme and Bail, and he was glad he did, because he foiled an assassination attempt on the two of them. It did require that he kill one or two clones, but he did it to save them. Due to Obi-Wan igniting his lightsaber around the Senate, it did exactly what Masa wanted it to do. He used it as a perfect bait to force Padme and Bail from the Senate for conspiring against the Empire. The Senate backed it, and it forced Kenobi to bring them back to Deveron. This did include Breha Organa and the twins. However, the Temple of Edict was becoming far too packed. It was never meant to be a permanent location as it was, but it was clear to the Jedi Masters that they needed to relocate. Thanks to Jocasta Nu, the Jedi removed themselves from Deveron and moved across the galaxy to the Outer Rim, where they'd set up shop inside of the High Republic Temple on Tennu. Before they moved there, Ahsoka happened to follow Padme's transport from Coruscant to Deveron. She hadn't been able to interact with her due to the whole Order 66 thing. Ahsoka also didn't notice the Obi-Wan-looking fellow traveling with her. Once there was an assassination attempt, she used a tracker to follow them to the Temple of Edict. She had her little reunion with her friends and joined them as they moved to their new location. There was a certain difference within both Obi-Wan and Yoda, having been victors in each of their battles. While Obi-Wan had his issues with seeing Anakin die in the way he had, he also knew the importance he had in the fight against the Empire. Yoda, on the other hand, became much more youthful in a way. Not because what happened was positive by any means, but he became more energetic. He had to break free from what was a continuous cycle of being a Grand Master on Coruscant. He felt a lot of pain in his heart for how he had failed. But with his victory against Sidious, he felt more of a call than perhaps ever before to make sure there was peace brought to the galaxy. He was willing to forego the Jedi way to make sure that the Empire didn't fully establish itself, which technically was helping. Whenever he went to save a Jedi or two, he would rampage through Imperial lines. This entailed the massacre of clone troopers and sometimes stormtroopers. There'd be survivors from these incidents, and the survivors would tell horror stories of the little green Jedi Master. Yoda left constant fear inside the heart of Masa. because unlike most senators, Masa knew what Palpatine was, and if he could be defeated by the greatest Jedi Master of the last several generations, then there was nothing stopping Yoda from killing Masa and crippling the Empire. Yoda to an extent knew that he had an effect on the Emperor of the galaxy, but he was wary of it. Depending on how threatened Masa felt, the Emperor could turn against his people as a means to either draw out the Jedi or to make the people turn on their own kind. The temple on Tanu wasn't fully refurbished, similar to the Temple of Edith, but it would manage for the time being. By this point, most of anyone who wanted to return to the Order did. Those who didn't went off and began their own lives. Due to Ahsoka's presence with the Jedi, she suggested the importance of a clone alliance, but many Jedi were against it. She had all the data and Captain Rex to prove her case, but for survivors of the Purge, it was too much to ask for. Serve alongside the clones when trying to fight an evil regime, there was no amount of trust that could be regained in which the Jedi would place themselves willingly between stormtroopers and clone troopers. As the months continue on further, Masa had his first major hiccup during his reign. It came when a group of clones exposed the plot behind the destruction of Tipoca City. There was a hologram footage of it, and the entire Senate was in outrage. It was a first show of resistance against the Emperor, and his reaction would determine his strength moving forward. Masa wasn't able to compromise and come to a powerful resolution when the Senate revealed what had happened to Tipoca City. He tried to blame the clones or Admiral Rampart, and then it blew up in his face. Because it did, there was a formal investigation pushed forward by the Senate, and it revealed the scientific facilities established across the galaxy during the later months of Palpatine's reign as Chancellor. Masa tried to play it off too, and that also backfired on him. He tried to play calm and collected about the entire ordeal. When he did, he ended up blaming Palpatine for the construction of those outposts. It was a slip of the tongue. But when you do that in front of an eager galaxy, people use those words against you. The entire system turned against Masa within the span of a couple weeks. Then began the protests. The remaining clones on planet would be used to ensure his stability as Emperor. On a night before the Senate pushed for a vote of no confidence in the Emperor, Masa enacted an executive order, one that would turn all the clones present against the Senate. However, there was a slight issue. When he enacted the executive order, it overwhelmed the inhibitor chips, because the Kaminoan technology assumed that the Emperor would only need to use one executive order at a time. Therefore, what transpired was an overwhelming of biochips inside the clones' heads. It only directly affected the Coruscant Guard. Some of the men ended up completely dying, just like Clone Trooper Top, or the chips malfunctioned and didn't do any harm to the clones. 1 out of every 3 clones who were hit with the executive order ended up dying, and the rest of them reacted to it. It was like a profound sense of clarity for these troopers, as they realized that they were being controlled for a single individual's gain. It wasn't because the Jedi were evil or the Senate was evil, it was because one individual had the keys to the kingdom, and they could control the clones with the simple use of a couple words. It was unsettling, and because Order 66 was running through their minds, it turned the clones against their Emperor. However, because Masa was preparing for a citizens' uprising, he had new soldiers brought to Coruscant to defend the building. So when the clones started dropping to the ground, and they saw the Emperor as their enemy, they turned, not just against each other, but the stormtroopers. Masa immediately used the aid of the Royal Guard to usher himself away from the chaos and off the city planet. While all this was happening, the Jedi on Tanu saw the chaos and decided they had to act. Padme was kind of a force of nature behind the move, essentially suggesting that if the Jedi go back, solve the situation, and then allow Padme to seize power, then they could save the Republic. However, there was still an issue. Because Padme had been seen with the Jedi and associated with them, they would likely reject her leadership. Padme kind of already knew that. This entire operation was a risk as it was, but as a public servant, it was her duty to not just her constituents on Naboo, but the citizens of the Republic. The Jedi understood that in doing this, they'd be putting themselves at a risk, but they could take something from Padme's own perspective. They were public servants. To not go there would be dooming the galaxy to more struggle under Imperial rule. The most elite of the Jedi traveled with Amidala and Organa to Coruscant. Padme didn't know she would live, so she arranged a scenario in which her children could have the best life if she died. They would be trained as Jedi but not restricted to their emotions, and they'd be able to leave whenever they wanted if they wanted. The Jedi on Tanu would honor her wishes. When they arrived on Coruscant, it was still chaotic. There were signs that it was dying down. Clones and stormtroopers kept getting reinforcements, so it went from a skirmish to a battle to a siege. The elongation of combat led to a majority of the Senate abandoning Coruscant until the chaos subsided. This is where Padme thrived, and with the help of a number of Jedi Masters including Yoda, Kenobi, Unduli, Voss, and Kaj, the Jedi were able to swiftly cut a hole through the fight to get Padme to the center console. They didn't have enough forces to completely end the fighting, but they could hold it off for however long it was needed of them. As the battle continued and the Jedi Masters cut down stormtroopers and sedated clone troopers, Padme sent her message to the galaxy. She claimed that she'd be taking over the Imperial Senate. There'd be no questions about her leadership, and she would renounce every single plan put in place by Palpatine and Masa. She made it as clear and concise as she could that the only outcome of her term was one of prosperity. She also gave an update on the state of affairs, and how she and her allies would like to handle the currently raging war between clones and stormtroopers. She called for a ceasefire, and to no one's surprise, it didn't work. So in an effort to bring both sides together, she discussed the pension program for the clones and the potential of less radicalized Imperial stormtrooper programs. She didn't really honestly have much to work with when it came to the Imperials, so she forced her hand where she could, and it ended up helping. Most of the reason the ceasefire never came to an end is because the stormtroopers didn't want to surrender their pride, and their pride cost them hundreds of soldiers. With Padme calling for an end to their siege, they could stop fighting and run for the hills as the clones reset everything. Padme's Emperor got rid of literally everything Palpatine did as quickly as she could. She got rid of the inhibitor chips, she ended the reign of Order 66, she destroyed the entire concept of the Empire, she submitted an official peace treaty to former separatist worlds. Most of the work on this had been done prior to her securing power in the Senate. She had all this ready to go in case an opportunity presented itself. So she was able to literally swoop in and vanish. Within the span of around 24 hours, she would have about 80% of her work done before she collapsed due to exhaustion. There were recordings left behind for the senators and the rebuilt Republic. Masa took everything here very personally and returned with an Imperial fleet, but when he got back, the stormtroopers and clones had dispersed. The people had reclaimed the Senate, and the Empire was dissolved politically. Truthfully, this allowed the former separatist worlds to have a chance to rise up, but they decided against it. They were tired of combat too, and therefore, they accepted the peace treaty and submitted it back to the day-old Emperor. When Masa returned to office, he tried to restructure any semblance of power he may have once had, but it proved to no avail. He couldn't do anything, and as he tried to do something, his troopers turned on him. It was a mixture of stormtroopers and Republic commandos that led this result. Padme's messages that were left behind fell into the hands of various senators in the Senate, even those who completely politically disagree with Padme's stances. They collectively decided that a democracy was better than no democracy, even if the person trying to save it didn't agree with their stances on everything. The polarization of the Clone Wars had come to an end. It was time for the Empire to be forgotten, and for the Republic to rebuild. The messages made by Padme wouldn't be heard by the public, until Masa got to work inside the Emperor's office. It's why he never heard the messages until his troops turned on him. They would execute him for treason against the galaxy, never giving him a chance to see the light of day. There of course were Imperials throughout the galaxy still loyal to the Empire, but there was one key piece making the Empire work, and it was Palpatine. He was the only individual in the galaxy that could rally people together the way he would have had he survived. There were some officers and moffs that tried to keep their power, but the re-establishment of the Republic would forbid them from ever gaining or keeping said power. On top of that, there was something ironic that happened. The Republic called for the re-election of Padme Amidala to become their chancellor. She was honored, but she believed that there should no longer be a position with such power. She and the senators would work very dedicatedly to make sure everything was restructured around democracy, not an individual's power. Once Padme finished her little endeavor with the Republic, she would decide to retire from politics and decide on staying at Tanu. She initially believed she would go back to Naboo, but her friends were here, and she needed them more than anything at the moment. Her family was still a massive support for her, but Padme needed people who were trained with handling Force-sensitive children to be around, which is where Obi-Wan and Ahsoka came in at. The three of them all struggled respectively with the loss of Anakin, but with each other they were able to find ways to move beyond his death, seeing his failure as their own failure, which is something the true Anakin Skywalker would have never wanted for them. Though the work of the Jedi wasn't finished. While they were no longer seen as villains of the war, there were troubles growing near them inside the galaxy. Crimson Dawn was growing, and because the Jedi Temple on Tanu was in the Outer Rim, they had to react. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka would be tasked with this, and Ahsoka finally rejoined the Jedi Order, after a conversation she had with Padme, that is. The two Jedi would embark on a journey to find the criminal syndicate and take it down. Once they did that, they could be on their way to helping out the Outer Rim finally recover. That was the end goal at the very least, save the Outer Rim. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka would spend the longer part of a couple months scouring the entirety of the Outer Rim, searching for Maul and his forces. They would even enlist the assistance of Outer Rim natives and former clone troopers. Despite the Republic being reborn, many clones took the pension plan and bailed out of the military. They got rid of their inhibitor chips and became a less aggressive version of mercenaries. They wouldn't do parity missions, more so act as private security forces to make sure they earned a living, but also serve people who were doing the right thing. It was a better way for them to maintain their own lifestyles. As the years went by, the clones would eventually be able to employ each other in the mercenary field. It would be a way for them to avoid working for corrupt people, that is. Regardless, these clones helped the two Jedi track down Darth Maul and his allies inside Crimson Dawn. They were able to dismantle groupings of criminals. It was very similar to the manner of which Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Anakin, and Rex did to the Zagirians during the war. Just this time, they were working closely with a couple dozen clone troopers. All of them elite. Gregor, Echo, Rex, Cody, Bly, Green, and a couple others. When they finally found Maul in Crimson Dawn, they ambushed him. It caught Maul off guard, and the Jedi chased down Maul. Obi-Wan honestly felt bad for Maul at this point. He had survived falling down an endless pit. He survived Sidious and Dooku. He built a criminal empire from the ground up, and he would watch it crumble too. There was a certain feeling of shame or pity that he felt for him. The two of them would engage in a lightsaber duel. It would be extremely fierce, and Kenobi knew that instead of aiming to kill, he wanted to give Maul another chance. Perhaps it was a lesson he learned from killing Anakin. Something about the entire scenario felt like the fight he had with his former apprentice, and it made him uneasy. During their duel, Ahsoka would be separated and forced to fend off dozens of Syndicate members. But with her clone brothers by her side, she and the clones beat them back. As for Maul and Kenobi, they fought across vessels and onto the top of a plateau. Obi-Wan seized the upper hand, finally, coming one with himself and flinging Maul across the landscape. The hit almost forced Maul off the edge, but he was saved by Obi-Wan. When Maul looked up, he saw his hand being held by Kenobi's. He couldn't believe it. Then he saw Obi-Wan raise his lightsaber. Maul closed his eyes. This is what he thought was the end, and then he was pulled up. When his eyes opened, he saw his lightsaber cut into two, and the kyber crystals missing. Obi-Wan looked down and told him that he wanted him to have a life for himself, suggesting he rethink everything. He knew he wouldn't ever join the Jedi, but there was a home for him somewhere in the galaxy. A home that wouldn't require him to take life and seize power. Truthfully, the entire situation and scenario was jaw-dropping for Maul. He lost, and Obi-Wan still saved him, because Obi-Wan just walked off as if nothing had ever happened. Kenobi was right though. Maul would never join the Jedi Order, but he would give up the dark side, in a way. He would become a mercenary-like figure who worked with the clones, finding his brotherhood and camaraderie in the clones he once murdered in cold blood. Obi-Wan's completion wouldn't be comparable to the one within Yoda. He had given himself a new life. He realized the errors of his ways and understood that his complacency cost the Order, so to ensure he never failed again, he would learn from his failures. Yoda's self-rebirth would become the centerpiece to the future of the Jedi Order. Youth was a cure for the Grand Master. His old age may have continued to get older, but his outlook on life became that of a young person ready to take on the universe. Of course, Yoda did carry the burden of losing the Order to Palpatine and the Clone Wars, and that haunting would never escape his mind, but his determination to leave a positive mark on the Order pushed him to be the best version of himself. His new energy would allow him to live for another 200 years, making him the eldest member the Jedi ever had, by a long shot too. In his 200 years, he would see the Jedi Order grow from 100 members to an enlarged body of 30,000 members. This was in part to seeing the effectiveness of the Jedi teachings, not the ones his former Order had, but the ones established by the original Jedi Masters. There was no midichlorian minimum, it was whoever was dedicated enough to learn. And what happened was people from around the galaxy came to their gates. They taught and spent years learning, many of these Jedi not being the strongest, but it wasn't ever about being the strongest. Because being a Jedi was about heart, not power. Yoda realized that, and before the end of his life, he would see a Jedi Order that mirrored the galaxy, one free from the dark side and full of peace, justice, and love. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Django Fett Clone, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliand, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Sharkman Dory, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewo 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Satan Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Gunley 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortis League Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. If you support one other ways, go check out the Patreon. Super cool perks on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So obviously it's gonna be a bit political. It has to be. It's the end of the Clone Wars era. The entire era is entirely political. So you have to focus on that spectrum. And with Padme being alive, it elicits something unique to happen. I kind of did a Padme Survive video earlier, and I wanted this to be more focused on the fact that because Vader isn't around, the focus itself is on the Empire, and having Masa made up being the figurehead of the Empire is something I didn't want to take away from him. He's a career politician, so he's obviously not going to be stupid, but I also wanted him to make a mistake that he couldn't control, and that being the clone inhibitor chips. As for the Jedi, I think Yoda having defeated Sidious would completely change his psyche, and I wanted to explore that as well, with him actually going beyond, living longer, and youth being the cure to old age, essentially. So, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.